thank you for coming to the Rural Hustings. We're here for an hour and a half, and we're basing some of our introductions on the No Rural Community Left Behind document that we sent to you all, and then a compilation of questions that you sent in when you registered for today's event. So thank you very much for that. I'm from Action with Communities in Cumbria, and I know some of you know us really, really well, but I'm just going to say we champion community and rural issues so that no one is disadvantaged by where they live. And we support communities to plan for their future, develop and sustain projects, work with others, and influence policy. We are the Rural and Community Development Charity for Cumbria. We've been around for 75 years. And we'd like you to ask you all to be respectful and polite in any communication you have with each other this evening. That would be really helpful, thank you. If it becomes necessary, I will ask people to leave the meeting. So let's just be nice, because that's a good place for us all to be, please. Thank you. If you could all stay on mute unless I come to you and ask you to speak, that would be great. And as I say, we're recording the meeting and we're going to put that and the chat on our website tomorrow, so other people will be able to access it that way. So the format is that we're going to go to each of the candidates and they'll introduce themselves. And we'll start that with Julia. Julia, would you like to introduce yourself and respond to the first document that we sent? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lorraine, and it's a huge privilege to be here. And I just want to say I've been a huge fan of ACT for many years, and it's wonderful the work you do bringing together rural communities. So my name's Julia Aglenby, and I'm standing as the Liberal Democrat candidate for Penrith and Solway, the new large constituency from Alston to Allenby and from Dunmail, Rays and Buttermere through to Brough by Sands. And because rural communities are really who I am in my what I do in my professional work. Some of you may be aware I work with farming communities across the Lake District, across Cumbria and across England. And so how communities work together is absolutely critical to that. But I was very well aware when I became selected that my focus has probably been more on farming and less on other areas. So over the last 3 weeks, I've cycled 500 kilometres through the rural communities of Penrith and Solway in order to meet with numerous community groups, meet with rural and small businesses, to meet with individual organisations and farming organisations and conservation organisations, as well as village halls committees. And it's been an absolutely fascinating time. And I'm well aware of the work of ACRE and have linked in with that. And I'm just really proud of the fact that the Liberal Democrat manifesto really not only responds to and ticks many of the boxes within your asks, but actually goes further in many areas. So one of our policies, for instance, if we start at the top, everything about rural communities needs to be both bottom up and top down. And people may remember the Commission on Rural Communities, the CRC, that there was in the past and the good work that did. The Liberal Democrats have proposed that there should be a Rural Communities Minister. And that means that can then work to bring together, stop the silos across the different departments, which is where rural communities really are let down at the moment. So I think that's very important. And then also the Liberal Democrats are very keen on devolution. So that the decisions are taken at the most local level possible. And in Cumbria, now no longer have districts. So the question is, how do we empower our parish councils, our town councils, to then work more effectively with our unitary authorities? And that's an area where, again, we're strong in how we can empower those lower levels of governance. And I've been to numerous parish council meetings again during the last 9 months since I was selected. But what's really struck me is while I've been biking, I've met with about 40 different organisations over the 3-week period. And some of those I've seen where rural communities are almost at breaking point. What has held people together? And they're coming up with innovative solutions to prevent that, but they're constantly hitting the buffers, how they can make those work. So if we take an example of Heskett Newmarket post office and village shop, the postmaster and the person who owns the shop is retiring. The community there is looking for a community ownership model with shareholders. But suddenly, they're finding, are they going to be able to get the funding available from the Community Ownership Fund? And that's something that I notice is in your manifesto, and it's something we very much be supporting. The same happened with Black Lion at IRB, with the miners industry, the miners arms in Nenthead, where I was up there yesterday. So for me, it's about empowering communities to do what they do so well and removing the barriers to change. And the Liberal Democrats have many policies that are going to help this. And I know we've got another 3 Liberal Democrat candidates here, but we need strong businesses, and our community groups need to be viable, because in effect, those community groups are running business. If your village hall goes bust, then that's not going to help anyone. So thank you very much, and thanks for listening. I should also just apologise that I will be having to leave early because I'm due in Hustings in Penrith at 10 to 6.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for keeping to time. That was really good. Okay, we'll move on to Gina now. Over to you, Gina, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to attend. My name's Gina Dowding. I'm the Green Party candidate for Morecambe and Loonsdale, a new constituency which has some of the South Lakes area incorporated for the first time. And so far, everybody that I've spoken to in that new patch, which covers Sedbergh, Kirkby Lonsdale, that kind of area, are so very distraught at losing Tim Farron as their MP. So I have to say that, credit where it's due. And now they are in a quandary as to who to vote for. So I love election time because it's great to be able to speak to people. And I want to say thank you so much for organising this hustings. The constituency that I'm standing in only has that sort of large landmass, but small population, rural population. But I do feel as though so many of the issues that are affecting people in our coastal towns, as well as at other places, are similar in the effect, even if the solutions are different. So I love getting out, talking to people on the doorstep, but what's really noticeable this election is just how so many people are struggling with the cost of living crisis, and people really feel quite insecure and vulnerable about the future. So I'm here to talk about Green Party policies, at least to some extent this evening. I'm very proud. I'm a lifelong member of the Green Party, and I have stood in a number of general elections before. We have worked on developing our policies for a sustainable future over decades now, and we're a very democratic political party. But one of the things that we do, it's not just a matter of the members developing policy, is we always consult with policy groups, experts, grassroots organisations about specific areas on our manifesto and how that affects them. And that's a tradition that I think works really well, because we ensure then that it's not just a top-down, oh, we think this is a good idea. We've worked with those people who know best. And so I would say that there are definitely a lot of the your recommendations in the No Rural Communities Left Behind document that we already have incorporated, but there is an absolute commitment from the Greens and Greens MPs who are elected to work with groups such as yours, such as ACRE, to ensure that the that grassroots community-based solutions to problems are taken heed of for those developing legislation in Parliament. I know we're going to come on to some specific things, and I look forward to some of the specific recommendations that you've made. But just to pick out a couple, housing, obviously, the affordable housing crisis is affecting so many people, definitely within our rural communities. I think one of the areas where we differ as Greens is we are saying we need to build new houses, but we are absolutely committed to building social houses for rent, and that's either council-owned houses, council housing, or provided by housing associations. And this idea that somehow if you just carry on building new houses per se with so-called affordable housing quotas that are very rarely met by developers because of their claims for they're not viable, it just doesn't wash. And so the Greens are saying, no, we actually have to give local authorities the resources and the power to build new council housing and social housing, or buy the supply that exists around in the area already. So that's one area. Just a little bit about me. I've been a councillor because I'm aware.
Gina, you've got about 5 seconds.
Oh, okay. So I'm a city councillor in Lancaster, have lots of experience as a councillor. Look forward about sharing some of those experiences. And also my connection with Cumbria is I worked for the Churches Trust for Cumbria some years ago. I helped set up that organisation, which was about better use of churches as community assets. And I'm sure that's something that we can explore.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you for closing down there. I appreciate it. Over to Barry now. Barry, are you there? Are you happy? 4 minutes you've got, Barry.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, I can hear you, Barry.
I'm unmuted. Excellent. Okay. Right. Barry Morgan, the Reform UK Party candidate for Barrow and Furness. As you know, like so many others, newly redrawn constituency, we've now got a heck of a lot of Copeland or Southern Copeland lumped in as well. So there's a huge swathe of rural area from Ravenglass and Scarfell Pike right down to Walney Island. So we're pretty much a rural constituency, as well as a conurbation. So what have we got? Well, we've got it all, haven't we? We've got fishing communities, often isolated, and farming communities, not just in the national park, but outside. Now that's a key area which I think any policymaker needs to contend with. I mean, it can be very discriminatory between neighbours, one just inside, one just outside. We have to make sure that it's there's no unnecessary discrimination when devising policy. But in terms of well, it is all about communities, and as a party we do stand for encouraging country sports, like shooting, very unpopular in some quarters, but we stand by it. We want to lower the business rates for retail, particularly those involved in country pursuits, including shooting and fishing and all those wonderful things that keeps communities vibrant and the money coming in. So, but in essence, we want to make things easier. Take away the bureaucracy, cut red tape. All parties say that, but we kind of mean it, you know. Get rid of Natural England, get rid of a lot of this HMRC red tape, which ties up farmers, including this. I always forget I wrote it down because I forgot. Where is it now? This is the British Cattle Movement Service or something like that. Creates more trouble than it's worth. A few good aspects of it, which could easily be recalled into the department. In other words, it's a bit of a quango nightmare becoming so. That's one of the things we'd get rid of, and encourage direct farm to retail. Farm shops, zero business rates and so on. Make it incentivize farmers to sell direct to the public, to innovate, to go organic, whatever sells. And there is a huge market. Clear labeling in the supermarkets to make sure people know when and why they're buying British, which should we would want to ratchet up to some 70% of consumption nationwide. Cumbria has a huge role to play in this, and so does my constituency. I mean, I don't know the local figures, I should, but it's about 20 billion, isn't it? From beverage, food and beverage contribution to the economy, 20 billion a year. We could get a lot more. We could get a bigger chunk of that than we currently do. 4 minutes, is it? Well, I think along that theme, I think that's the thing to emphasize in this first 4-minute address. The tax breaks for small abattoirs, small cottage-style food processing enterprises. We really need to get local rural communities humming. And I was going to go on about fishing communities too, but I don't have time for that, I suspect. So let me just leave you with those thoughts.
Thank you, Brian. You've saved us 20 seconds.
Barry.
Sorry, Barry. Sorry, Barry. Yes. Izzy, you're next, please.
Thank you. Oh, good evening, everybody. So yeah, I'm Izzy, and pretty new to politics, so bear with me. And I'm very new. I learned the language of documents like this. So there's a whole new language to learn when you enter the world of dealing with organisations like ACRE. So apologies if I don't speak quite the same language. So I was very new to politics, only really became involved on the Friday of the deadline, after a bit of umming and hawing and wondering what to do, and thought, well, no, I think it's the right thing to do. So I live in Staveley, so that's between Windermere and Kendal. I'm obviously standing in West London, Lonsdale, and I'm a business owner. I'm just sat in our little office now. I'm an employer. We also farm. We have various aspects, lots and lots of investments here in the South Lakes. Although we're fairly new to the South Lakes, two of my partner's children have moved here, so we now have grandchildren in the area as well. So became involved really with the Heritage Party, which is a new party set up in 2020 by David Curtin, who came out of UKIP. And it was really just seeing amongst the madness of 2020, there was clearly a very totalitarian regime establishing itself. And really that was enough to give me enough inspiration to look into the Heritage Party, which was the only party standing up against what was happening in 2020, against the lockdowns and all the basic removal of our rights and freedoms that has continued ever since. So yeah, fast forward 4 years, election was announced with just a few weeks to go, and I decided to stand. So I did, however, grow up in rural Yorkshire. I had a wonderful childhood, and we lived on an estate. It was a private home on an estate, but as in a farming estate. So I really feel that I saw the best of what British country life could be. Back in the 1980s, we still had the woodman, we still had the dairy farm, we still had the all the different aspects of the gamekeeper. We had it was a really unique insight into rural life, and of course that community now has it's still there and there's still farming, but it's very, very different from what it was 30 years ago. I rolled down maybe a bit more than 30 years ago. I feel there's a lot of opportunity now. Obviously, Cumbria is a wonderfully rural area. It's wonderful to discover all the different organisations like ACT that are doing so much for rural areas. I absolutely believe in empowering rural communities because I grew up in one. I grew up in one where people were self-sufficient, where people had skills, where there was an infrastructure, there was a huge support between neighbours. I mean, it almost harks back to the Amish, but the farmers used to just go and spend a day on each other's farm and help, you know, sort of all hands together, and then the next week they'd go. And it was very, very different to what it is now. I've explained that to a couple of farmers I know, and they can't believe anybody would do such a thing. So there's been a real shift in mentality, and I think that's been done partly probably as a result of foot and mouth, and then the whole years since then. But I really feel farming communities, and I talk about farming because farming is at the head, everything trickles down from farming. I really feel that there's an opportunity for communities to get that back, and I'd like to think that the Heritage Party would be at the head of that. We are the Heritage Party, as in we want to look after our heritage, and our heritage is very much a strong rural community. It's the backbone of Britain. So I'll leave it there because I've had my 30 seconds. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Izzy. Tim, you're next, please.
And thanks for having me. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks for the work that you guys do in Action for Communities and for the document. I think rural communities are left behind, and they're left behind more often by accident than by design, by a government that is a long way from rural communities, members of parliament, ministers who very rarely come from rural communities. But that's a huge problem. And I would say that the issues that face rural communities can be diverse and different, but there are many commonalities. And we'll start with housing. I think the lack of genuinely affordable housing in communities like ours in Westmoreland. I should say I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for Westmoreland Lonsdale. I also speak for the party nationally on environment, food and rural affairs. But I think housing is critically important. It's not just what we do with our new stock. Absolutely, we should build houses that we need rather than houses that meet the demand that developers would like to build for. We need to build zero carbon homes. We need to build council homes, social rented homes. We also need to do things to protect the existing housing stock by limiting the flow of homes from the long-term private rented sector into the short-term sector, Airbnb, and limiting the number of second homes so that communities don't simply die out. Knock-on effect for rural services such as schools and pubs, shops, post offices, and what have you, is huge when you see a decline in rural population simply because the housing stock isn't lived in by anybody most of the time. Of course, the issues that we're affected by also include health, education, policing, really important public services. And by nature of sparsely populated communities, we're often a long way from those services. The fact that so many of my constituents have to do 3-hour round trips, 4-hour round trips to get basic cancer treatment in Preston, that is unacceptable. The threat to GP surgeries, the inability for anybody almost to find an NHS dentist. These are problems that are extreme in rural communities. We also need to recognise that we have something quite special here. It is an enormous privilege to represent a constituency, if I get the chance to do so, that includes not just the Lake District, but the Dales as well. And what that means is that we don't just look after our community and our environment, our landscape for ourselves, but for the rest of the world and for those who come and visit. And that's significantly important when you think that 70-odd% of England's land mass is agricultural and a much higher percentage of our community's land mass is agricultural. If we care about our environment, about our landscape, about natural flood management solutions, about tackling biodiversity loss, about tackling climate change, then we have to care about farming. And we also need to not forget that the principal motivation for most farmers is as food producers. If we don't work with the motivation of the people who work the land, then we will fail in our environmental aims and in our fundamental duty to feed the country. I would say also that representing rural communities involves a different kind of relationship. It is my track record, I hope, and it's certainly my absolute intention should I be elected, to serve communities in a kind of forensic way and in a passionate way. And that means being drawn alongside the likes of Shap when they lose their post office to bring it back. Places like Hilton and Merton that don't have access to broadband, to make sure that they do, to work as we successfully have done with the Cartmel Peninsula to see the return of lost bus services, to help the community in and around Haverthwaite to get their GP surgery back, and then more generally to be a voice for farmers. I just one final word about farming. The Liberal Democrats have got a very well-costed and ambitious manifesto when it comes to the natural environment and farming, to put an extra £1 billion into the Elms scheme. And just a quick comment about Natural England. Some of that money should go into Natural England. There are many failings that Natural England are guilty of, but one problem is that they don't have the resource to help small farmers, tenant farmers and small owner-occupiers to actually get into those schemes. They're the people who are losing money whilst the big boys get lots out of it. If only we had an infrastructure that helped those people into the new schemes, we wouldn't have people staring down the tunnel of potentially losing the family farmer to several generations. So a whole range of things there. But I think rural communities are wonderful places to live, exhilarating places to live. It's a privilege to live in one and to serve them. But they're also communities that are under threat. And we need to make sure that we defend them. And rural voices in Westminster need to be louder than average to punch above our weight if we're going to get heard.
That's great. Thank you, Tim. And next we have Adrian, please.
There we are.
Adrian.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yes. Well, good afternoon. I'm Adrian Waite. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for Barrow and Furness. And thanks very much to Action for Rural Communities for inviting me to this hustings this evening. I'm not a professional politician. I'm an accountant. I've got experience in local government. I'm currently running a management consultancy business that mainly supports local authorities and housing associations with financial management and value for money issues. I'm a former chair of the Impact Housing Association, which worked right across Cumbria, including in rural areas. I used to lecture at Newtonbridge Agricultural College, and I'm a widow with 3 children and 4 grandchildren. So that's sort of me in hopefully a few short sentences. I first came to live in Cumbria in 1993 when I was appointed Finance Director at Copeland Council. And I've always enjoyed living in Cumbria. So when I decided to set up a management consultancy business, we decided we'd stay in Cumbria because that's where me and my family both wanted to live and to be. We first lived in Frizzington when we first came here, which is a former mining village in West Cumbria. Then we moved to Merton, which Tim Farron mentioned a couple of minutes ago, a village of about 100 people in the Eden Valley, a farming village. And then we moved to Appleby, and then I'm in Kirkby Stephen now, which are the two well-known market towns in the Eden Valley, as most people will probably know, and I'm a member of Kirkby Stephen Town Council. So I've been involved in living in rural areas and working in rural areas in Cumbria for quite some time. Obviously, I like living in rural Cumbria, or I wouldn't be here. But I am aware there are a lot of problems here. Things like a lack of economic development, inadequate infrastructure, pockets of deprivation, aging and declining populations, a lack of public transport, lack of access to health and social care, diminishing public services, and a lack of affordable housing. And there's also a need to protect the environment of Cumbria. I mean, there's recently, for example, been a campaign to save the Roanhead area on the Furness Peninsula from inappropriate development that I've been involved in. I think the Action with Communities paper, No Rural Community Left Behind, is an excellent paper. I agree that a brighter future for the countryside is possible, one in which rural communities are empowered to become stronger, fairer and more sustainable places where everybody can thrive. And I especially like the approach of positioning communities themselves as agents for change, not least in respect of achieving net zero. I don't think rural communities want to be dependent on anybody else or on the authorities. They want to be independent and they want to be empowered to shape their own futures. And I think that's something that Action in rural communities are very clear on, and something that the Liberal Democrats are also very clear on. So to get to the core of what you asked me to sort of talk about in these 4 minutes, which was how would we address the 4 priorities that you've identified, I'll now say a little bit about that. So first, you want proactive rural proofing. Well, as Julie said, we would appoint a cross-departmental minister for rural communities to make sure that rural voices are heard right across government. So we would put rural voices right at the top of decision-making right across government and make sure everything's joined up. Secondly, you want to see support for community-led activity. I think we are the party above all parties that believes in empowering individuals and communities rather than relying on the state providing or relying on market forces providing things. So we would enable communities to take action themselves while providing appropriate funding and appropriate support. Right, 30 seconds. I shall keep to 30 seconds if I can. Thirdly, contributing to and benefiting from transition to net zero. We'd ensure there are nature-based solutions to net zero. We put the farming and food system on an environmentally sustainable footing, and we'd increase renewable energy, reduce energy bills and support community and decentralised energy. Fourth, investment in services, infrastructure and affordable housing. We'd ensure gigabit broadband is available to every home and business. We'd establish a strategic small surgeries fund to support medical services in rural areas. We'd build homes that are desperately needed in rural areas, including more social and affordable homes. We would give farmers and fishers a fair deal. We would help motorists by extending the rural fuel duty relief, and we will give local authorities powers to restore bus routes and support provision of bus services by other organisations. Thank you very much. I hope that's just in 4 minutes.
Thank you, Adrian. Just about. Okay, and last but by no means least, we have Brian. Off you go, Brian.
Oh boy, I was worried this would happen. I've already had Tim Farron and Julia Agliambi and Adrian talking in front of me about the Lib Dem policies. Carlisle has changed a lot because, of course, Penrith and the border, I have to be careful to use the right term, has been sliced. And the border area, if you can call it that, has now been brought into Carlisle, with Carlisle losing bits of Dalston and Brough. So Carlisle has changed from being really totally urban, suburban constituency into one where we've got, I think, 16,000 new voters coming in from the rural areas and losing about 6,000 suburban, if you want to call it that, people in Dalston and Brough. So we now have in Carlisle not only an increased number of people on the electoral roll, 75,000 rather than 65,000. A lot of them are very rural. So I went on a tour of community centres and village halls and so forth, and I made sure about 1/3 of the places I visited were not in the middle or in the suburbs. Stapleton, I went to Longtown, Brampton, Hayton, Scaleby, Wetherall, Warwick Bridge, Houghton, which is sort of quite near, and Crosby-on-Eden. So having talked to people out in those areas, gun clubs, basket weaving clubs, Women's Institute, whatever it might be, I was beginning to get a much firmer idea about what people in the rural areas are interested in. and also interactions with the Stanwix Rural Parish Council makes me worry a lot about the way that Cumberland Council, which of course is run by Labour at the moment, is sort of going past parish councils. And I think parish councils are quite powerful in a way. They can lodge their own taxes, precepts they're called, and they can do a lot in their statutory consultees on planning. So what we have at the moment are these things called community panels, which are sort of made up of councillors, but they're bypassing the parish councils. And I would like to see the parish councils stronger. I also like to see Carlisle itself become parished, so it has its own town council as well. The other things that are mentioned by the other candidates, I'd just like to emphasise. We're talking about social homes a year, 150,000 social homes a year, not just affordable homes, but social homes. And that's every year for each year of the next Parliament. And we're already starting in this in places like Kingston and Surbiton, where our leader, Ed Davey, is. NHS funding formulas are very worrying. I had a meeting with the chairman of the Cumberland Infirmary, and he explained to me that people in second homes, those people don't count towards the funding formula for the local hospital. We want to see, in the manifesto, we set up to a 500% council tax surcharge, or maybe it's 500% off council tax, and a new planning class that would enable this to happen, which is second home. We do have some at the moment which are holiday homes, and I've been involved in Cumberland Council as the councillor for Stanwix on holiday homes, which you're not allowed to live in for more than 28 days. And we've got rid of that second home allowance for local people who are using mobile homes, and they're not allowed to live in them during the winter and so on. So to sum up, Carlisle has become much more rural, and I've had to take that into account in terms of talking to people and finding out. I came to Cumbria nearly 10 years ago to live near Frizzington, like Adrian, in Annandale Bridge. I met a lovely lady in Carlisle, and now I live in Stanwix. The rest is history. My background is a bit like Carlisle: urban, suburban, and rural. Thank you very much.
That's great, Brian. Thank you very much for that. I'm just posting in the chat a message from Matty, who is the candidate for the Conservative candidate for Westmoreland and Lonsdale. He wasn't able to make the meeting, but I offered the people who apologised the opportunity to give us something in writing. So Matty did that. So I'll just post that now so you can have a little look at that. Not quite sure why that hasn't gone. Why hasn't that gone? Hasn't actually posted. I'll have another go at it in a minute, but let me just first of all start on the questions, because that'll move us forward, and I'll make sure that we sort that out from Matty in a moment. So the first question is from Helen, and she's going to ask a question about broadband. Over to you, Helen.
Thanks, Lorraine. So I'd like to ask, what will you do to ensure fair and equal access to fibre broadband for rural people?
Okay, and I'm going to go to Julia first, because she's going to have to leave us shortly. So Julia, you've got a minute and a half to have a go at this question, please.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a huge issue. Where I live, we had to do having lack of broadband is a huge across many parts of Cumbria. Now, we have been a pilot for Hyperfast GB, Cumbria has, and that is potentially dealing with about 65,000 households across Cumbria. But then there are people who are getting fibre directly anyway through commercial means. But my big concern is about the people in the middle, where the government has decided that area where I live on a remote farm just north of Armathwaite, that it's commercially valid for people, that a company will provide for us, and they're just not going to do that. So we're very much in the left behind category. And I know that there are some inspiring projects like Barn 4 and others who are delivering for rural broadband, but effectively we're going to need more money. And now it's an essential requirement now for whether you're a child, whether you're working, whether you need to do your banking. Everybody now needs access to good quality broadband that's stable and works. And so the Liberal Democrat manifesto has a commitment to all homes having gigabit broadband, and that will require investment. I think that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Julia. Barry, can you have a go at that question, please, about broadband? You're on mute, Barry.
Oh, there, I am unmuted, I think. Okay.
Yes, you are now. Yeah.
You know, I think Reform UK doesn't really have a policy for rural broadband, but that's okay because I'm allowed to make it up and stamp my authority. No, quite clearly, we cannot have thriving rural communities without broadband, and I think it will be unthinkable. If any government were to take power and say, "Oh no, we're not going to give broadband to rural communities," clearly everyone's going to say that they are. Personal interest in this, I had was 6 years running a small holding in rural Brittany, and there was no internet, nothing, zero. There was possible, however, to get and to have. I imagine it would be possible to subsidise these little gizmos, which take from other signals on high points around the environment, and you can even have them from satellite. So I'm sure this can be got around in subsidised form for key isolated rural communities to ensure communication and the running of smooth business, not beyond the wit of man. And I'll push for that, of course.
Thank you, Barry. Gina.
Thanks.
Well,
I think the excuse me. We've got an absolute commitment to digital inclusion. As has been mentioned, it's just not acceptable in 2024 that people are digitally excluded for so many reasons. We need it for education, for business, for improved access to health services, and so many other areas. I've been involved in my role as a city councillor in a green-led initiative, which was about investing 1.8 million in a spine of fibre infrastructure, and then commercial organisations and internet providers are able to piggyback on the back of that. But I think what we're saying in our manifesto is actually this shouldn't be at the mercy of commercial investment. We actually need to say government needs to fund this and local authorities need to have the funding to help deliver it. So I just want to mention, because so many of the things we all be talking about will be about investment and the need for more funding. And after the austerity that has taken such a hard hit on local authorities and so many other public services, we really need to address that 15 years of actual decimation of public services. And the Greens are very clear that we need to look at raising tax and income from assets. So we have a policy, it's on a wealth tax. I don't think it would affect anybody in this virtual room. On assets above 1 million would be 10 million would be taxed at 1% per year, and 1 billion 2% per year. Since we have made this policy public, I gather that the Labour Party are now also looking at that idea of a wealth tax, because
Gina, your time's up, so
lovely.
Thank you for that. Adrian, your turn now, please.
Let's say hello.
Yes, thank you. I think, am I on? Yes, good. I think key to what we need to do with the economy of Cumbria, not only in rural areas, but also in many of the urban areas as well, is to try to make sure that we get secure, high value employment and a more diversified employment base. And critical to that is making sure that we have good broadband connections right across the county, including in the most sparse areas, and probably the sparse populated part of Cumbria is the South Copeland area of the Barrow and Furness constituency. So I'm very pleased the Liberal Democrat policy is to ensure that we get gigabit broadband available to every home and business in every community in Britain. That is very important to doing what we want to do with the economy of rural Cumbria, and for that matter, urban Cumbria as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Izzy, you're next, please.
Thank you. Yeah, it was. I felt really. I'd really need to spend some time around government to fully understand the relationship between government and communications companies. Suspect when Tim speaks, he will tell us something, know a little bit more. But as far as I know, it's very complicated. So a company that wins an urban area can also then have the commitment of a rural area, and it's a very complicated system, and I really feel that the government needs to take control here. The Heritage Party is proposing a rural czar, and it would be the job of that rural czar to make that happen, really. If the government is committed to switching off analogue, which they've said they are, then the government must help communities to get digital. There's just no other way around it. I was a little bit interested by the question for fibre broadband. I wonder if fibre broadband is the best option. There are I know obviously the options diminish for rural areas, but fibre broadband, from what I understand, is not guaranteed in rural areas, and it might be better to look at something like satellite broadband, or if there are other options. I'm not, unfortunately, an engineer of broadband, but it needs absolutely taking in hand. The government needs to own it and to take responsibility for it.
Thank you, Izzy. Tim, you're next, please.
Fab, yeah, a quick bit of what and then why. So what would we do? So we recognise Project Gigabit has got a lot to commend it. However, there are, first of all, in Cumbria, almost 2,000 properties that are within scope, as they say, which will not be reached. And then you've got those that are not in scope at all. So the idea that this is going to cover 100% of rural properties, you know, it's still going down the route of trying to get the lowish hanging fruit. And rural communities will always be at the end of that. They'll always be the highest hanging fruit and the hardest to get at. And so there's ways of dealing with this. So I don't want us to rip up Project Gigabit. I think it will do a lot of good. But there's no doubt that rural communities, and particularly sparsely populated areas and standalone community, hill farms, for example, they're the ones that will get missed out. And so the answer seems to me to be aware of just local alternative solutions. So Julia mentioned Barn, Broadband for Rural North. We're so blooming lucky to have them in Cumbria and in North Lancashire. They are an outstanding provider, a community-based not-for-profit, and they do a brilliant job. It seems incredibly, I mentioned earlier on Hilton and Merton, these the parishes around there. Places like that will get served and will get broadband connection if we can bring back the vouchers and do a kind of double system where communities that are not easily reached by Project Gigabit can draw down vouchers, pool them, and then deliver Gigabit plus broadband through outfits like Barn. It's not hard. It just needs the government to recognise that one size won't fit all. And a quick why, part of the future of rural communities is people being able to make a living, not living in an urban area. And one way you can do that is to run a small business. 1 in 4 people in the workforce in my existing patch in Westmoreland and Lonsdale work for themselves. And one way that's possible is by investing in new technology.
Thank you. And again, not last but by no means least, Brian.
Oh boy, I have to sweep up all of the the cuttings that are left from the other people. Barn, yes, fantastic. Gigabit, OpenReach has failed. I think Barry said it's not beyond the wit of man to put this in. It's not easy though, is it? Because this government promised it and failed. And I know in Warwick, on Eden, for example, there was a particular patch allocated to a provider, and the provider withdrew. Within the current range of bidding, they're not going to get fibre for this for some foreseeable future. So yes, the Liberal Democrats would produce broadband to every house using various different technologies. You can't use fibre to every single one. I think one of the problems we're having at the moment also is we need to learn from what's happened so far. So the relative failure of BT OpenReach, the problems of some areas not getting upgraded because some providers withdraw from their patch and those patches not reallocated, and also the mess that's left behind at the moment. Certainly in Corby Hill, they've been putting up pavements, and in some other areas putting in telegraph poles when they easily could have run the lines underneath. And they're not leaving things the way they found them, and the local authority are not holding them to it. Oh, sorry. What do you got there, Lorraine? Can't see you. You're on mute.
Sorry, 15 seconds, Brian.
Oh, well, that's it. I think I made my point. Thank you very much.
Okay,
oh, that was what it
you.
was, 15 seconds. Yeah, okay, fine.
Okay, so it's quite a short time for you to respond to these questions, but you have had the questions beforehand, so I'm hoping that's going to have helped you. Thank you for the question, Helen, and it is a really contentious one for our rural areas. We as an organisation get a lot of queries about broadband, so it is a real issue for local people. I'm going to move on now. Just to say the comment from Matty is now in the chat. And while the candidates are speaking, if you've got any questions or any comments, then please do feel free to put them in the chat. That would be fine. And we're going to go to the next question, which is from Fran on housing.
Thank you, Lorraine. Some of you have already mentioned approaches to housing, but my question, based on things that have come into us, is how will you increase the availability of locally affordable homes to rent and to buy in rural communities?
Thank you, Fran. And we're going to start this time with Brian.
Oh boy. So first of all, we have committed to a housing plan, right? So there are, I guess, 3 different types of houses. You've got the ones which are totally on the free market. You've got affordable housing, so a percentage of which has to be in any new development, and we should stick to those percentages. And we should stop the developers trying to play lowball by saying that they can we just please do 10% affordable housing? This is happening a lot. It just happened in Scotby, near me, on the edge of Carlisle. But we are seeing 150,000 social homes a year, and the way those will be built using modern construction techniques, MCTs, in effect, parts of the houses being prefabricated and put into place quickly. And that's one of the things that would allow us to put a lot of new housing in all those categories, and certainly social housing for rent is there, because that's where we need our key workers. You need key workers near the hospitals, you need key workers near train stations, and key workers near utilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Tim?
Forgive me. Yes. So I think this is possibly the biggest issue facing rural communities because everything else hangs on it. So as Brian already alluded to, our workforce crisis here is caused by a housing crisis. 1 in 5 social care jobs in Cumbria is vacant. And why? Well, because of the lack of affordable housing. That has a massive knock-on effect when it comes to the rest of the health service, waiting times through A&E, to be seen by any kind of a doctor, ambulance response times and all the rest of it. So this is as close to a silver bullet to fixing the problems of rural communities that there is. And so what do we do about it? Well, it's what we have and there's what we need. With what we have, we need to bring in new planning categories for for short-term lets and for second homes. So we can limit the numbers that there are of those, and so you can maximise the number of homes that are available to make sure that communities are vibrant, that we don't lose schools and all the other services we desperately need simply because we don't have a community big enough to sustain them. So it's about managing the stock that we've got, and then it's about what we build. I am the opposite of a NIMBY, but I am fed up of seeing homes built that are not for local need and that are not zero carbon and aren't contributing to tackling the climate emergency. And so what we need is powers for local authorities. That means national parks and councils to enforce 100% affordability, social rented and other models, but particularly social rented, and to make sure that all homes we build are completely insulated, have renewable energy attached to them and are zero carbon. It's about giving local communities power so the developers develop what we need and what local communities need rather than what they would like to build.
Thank you, Tim. Izzy, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, agreed. It's absolutely crucial issue. The 3 real issues are the shortage of houses, and what houses there are just not available for people half the time. And then when they do come available, it's the price of those houses. So we'd like to see building of houses where appropriate. Apparently, to alleviate our nationwide housing crisis, we need to build 200 houses a day across the country, and that definitely is not happening. Obviously, I think there's slightly less pressure in Cumbria than other areas, but still, obviously, it's very, very heartbreaking to hear from people. So yeah, we do need to build some houses. I'd like to see the change in the taxation on landlords. Since 2017, landlords have been taxed on income, not profit, which means that a lot of them have been pushed to put their houses into the holiday home market. I've seen that myself in our business. And that has taken a great many houses out of the market. I appreciate it's rentals, but it was still homes for people, and that has been a serious issue. I think it's changing next year that Airbnbs or holiday homes are going to be slightly better hit, but I think it's way too little, too late. Of course, if it does go ahead now anyway. And then I think nationwide, well, just house prices everywhere are just incredible, but around here, it's just almost not worth looking, really. So the plan for the Heritage Party is to limit home ownership for anybody who is a foreign national to 1 property. That must be the main residence, and they must have lived in Britain for 5 years at that point. So we hope that would free up numerous properties for local people, and then we'd be able to prioritise British people. Thank you.
Thank you, Izzy. Adrian, over to you now.
Yes, thanks. The reason why we've got a housing crisis in Cumbria and right across Britain is because ever since the 1980s, successive governments haven't built enough homes for the increasing population that we've had. And the result of that means that house prices have gone up, rents have gone up, and there's been a shortage of housing, which has resulted in a lot of people being homeless or having to live in unsuitable accommodation. And the solution to that problem is to build more houses, and particularly to build more affordable houses and social houses. I was on the Liberal Democrats working group on housing policy that decided to recommend 150,000 social homes a year should be built, which is more than I think any other party is proposing. And to do that, we will have to have changes in the way the so-called affordable housing programme is spent to provide funding for housing associations and local authorities to build new social homes. There are also things that need to be done on the planning side. We need more meaningful community engagement to make sure homes are built in places where which are suitable and appropriate. We need to use more rural exception sites, and we need to change the planning rules in the way that Tim described, so that if somebody wishes to change a house from being a sole or main residence into a holiday house or a rented house, then they'd need planning permission for it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Adrian. Barry, over to you.
Right, unmuted. Much the same in the sense that it is down to the planning laws, and we need a looser fitting planning regime to accommodate fast track development of brownfield sites in the rural areas, in rural communities, to develop social housing. Not just social housing, but social affordable housing in the true sense of the word, not the developer's definition, for local communities and people coming in to work as care, in care and other key professions, or even non-key professions, doesn't matter. The people coming in to keep the communities vibrant need access to reasonably priced housing. That can be done through the planning laws, but primarily we need to look at the aging population and to ensure that they're not kicked 40 kilometers down the road when they need social care or care homes and so on. Keeping care in the community requires a carer to live in the community. Making sure that when they do have to go into a home, it's not 40, 50 miles away, requires developing brownfield sites for care homes to look after the indigenous peoples of those communities. So it has to be a multifaceted thing. You can't. Priority has to be given to local people. You can't keep foreigners out, just as you wouldn't want to be kept out yourself if you were in foreign parts. But certainly local families and young professionals, young artisans must be prioritised in the housing system. How that works exactly would have to be debated and hammered out with the local authority, but it must be done.
Thank you, Barry. And over to you, Gina.
Thank you. So I would just reiterate what I said at the introduction, that we would build or enable the building of 150,000 social homes for rent, as has been said, is the Lib Dem pledge as well, because this is an affordable housing crisis. The housing market doesn't really operate as a true market because people are buying houses for investment, and that needs to be addressed. So basically it's affordable housing that's needed, as it's been said in so many other ways. We would bring in a fair deal for renters, ending no fault evictions. Legislation that was going through Parliament didn't quite get through. That would be one of our priorities, and to give greater priority for long-term leases. But the planning system has been alluded to. There are huge problems with the current NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, that causes endless problems for local authorities to really get control over local spatial planning. And we would bring in a land use planning policy framework. So because we've basically got to balance the various needs and demands on our land of the climate crisis, to protect nature, to grow enough food, and of course to provide the right kind of houses for the people that need them.
Thank you very much, Gina. In our experience working with rural communities, the housing system is totally broken. And one of the biggest challenges around housing is that rural housing costs more to develop than it does in the larger populations. It would be really interesting to hear from everybody what they could do about that, but we don't have time for that now, but interesting to think that one through. Next question is from Josie, and Josie's going to talk to us about transport. Over to you, Josie.
Thanks, Lorraine. Hi, everyone. Rural residents pay more and travel further for services. What bold action can you take on rural transport and travel, including travel for health services, to address this inequality?
Thank you, Josie. And we're going to go straight to Gina again on this one, please. Over to you, Gina.
So fundamentally, we need to be looking at empowering local authorities to run bus services. So renationalise or republicise public services of the buses. Obviously, where you've got rural communities with very sparsely populated areas, there would need to be tailor-made solutions overall, but we need to gain control over public transport, but buses for rural communities are essential, with serious investment on an annual basis. I mean, basically, there should be sort of same base price to travel, whether you're in a rural area or in an urban area, just to ensure access for all. We need to make buses more popular for everyone. So free buses for the under 18s, get young people used to using the buses, not those who can, relying on parents. I've had a very successful experience of setting up and using or sort of liaising with a bus user group. So I think, you know, communities can find solutions. They know best where the demand is and how to really help meet people's needs. But it needs to be a properly subsidised public transport system if it's going to work properly for everybody and create access for all.
Great, thank you, Gina. Barry, over to you now.
Oh, sorry, I keep delaying on the unmute business. Look, not to waste time here. It's a no-brainer. You just have to increase the frequency of buses, make them more attractive in terms of price, make them free for the elderly and for student or school age kids. People have to get about, otherwise there's no freedom, and without that there's no community. It's one of the things which has to be subsidized. Reform is not in favour of a mass subsidy of our institutions, but water and transport is which is like water. It's essential for life. You have to subsidise it, and it has to be quality, frequent, and reliable. So very clearly, that's it.
Great, thank you, Barry.
Very simple.
Over to you, Adrian.
Yes, I mean, public transport is absolutely critical in rural areas so that people, particularly people without cars, can access the sort of services that you need to travel outside your village to the nearest town to get. I said a few things in the introduction about Liberal Democrat policy on buses, but I'd like to give you a little example of the sort of thing that I think can and should be done. Kirkby Stephen Town Council, where I'm a member and the member who takes the lead on public transport, last year negotiated a scheme with Stagecoach to run a bus on Saturdays between Kirkby Stephen and Penrith, which was subsidised by Kirkby Stephen Town Council and some of the other parish councils along the route. That has been a bigger success than was expected. It not only ran for the first 6 months that it was expected to run, it started April last year. It has continued to run ever since then with increasing numbers, and we're now very hopeful that Stagecoach will start offering it as a commercial service that won't require any subsidy. I mean, that proves a number of things. It proves firstly that town councils can do things and that local communities can do things and take initiatives and get things started, and I think more of them should do that. It also proves that you can pump prime bus services, and that is something that the principal authorities supported by government, people like Western and Furness Council and Cumberland Council, I think should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Izzy, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, years ago I made a documentary about a little little village bus, and it was just a delight. And the interaction between the driver and the people who got on was just wonderful. Been going for years. And yeah, rural buses are absolute priority. They need to come back. I think there's you know, we have to be realistic that people who live in the countryside don't expect perhaps the services of the towns, and so we could look at sort of twice a week or 3 times a week, that sort of thing. It doesn't have to be all you know, the huge expense that we're perhaps talking about. But I just wonder if perhaps it's time to just think about the communities a little bit differently. And in Staveley, I see Fran is here tonight, and she's been very involved with the Staveley Abbey, which was the plan to create housing out of it, and that create a little hub and a place for older people to come and live. And actually, instead of needing to leave the rural little community, perhaps they could live more, you know, build a little hub within the rural community to bring the life to you. So it's just a slightly different way of thinking. Perhaps we could all be a bit more imaginative about rural communities, and yes, transport obviously to and from them is really important, but also how can we improve rural communities so there's less need to go, and perhaps we need an investment in our rural support networks, so we get, you know, the travelling health teams, pharmacy teams, banks, libraries, all those sort of things. So yeah, it'd be an exciting thing to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Izzy. Tim, over to you.
Yeah, well, first thing, I think I agree with Gina about bus services. I think the crucial thing here, and it's keep it on the Liberal Democrat Party policy, is to recognise it is madness that only 2 authorities in the country are legally allowed to run their own bus service, and not one of them is rural. And so give local authorities the power to run bus services. Bus services never make a profit. In London, they don't make a profit, but they are the fundamental oil in the machine that is the London economy, and they would be if they work properly in the rural economy. It's vital that we therefore have bus services right throughout rural communities, and that they're affordable. The £2 bus fare is one of those things I'll give this government credit for. It's a fat lot of good if there's no bus, though. And so we need to make sure that we have those services everywhere. And it's about making your own luck. So I chair something called Cumbria Better Connected, which is a group of people campaigning for better public transport on the ground and fighting for things like the council are backing in Westmoreland and Furness, which is to see an effective dualling of the Lakes line, so we can get the passing loop at Burneside, which doubles the capacity on the line from Oxenholme to Windermere. But there's a little part of Josie's question, which is about access to health. And the other part, the other end of that, is making sure we have health services close to where people live. And so I'm not going to apologise for still banging on about the fact we need radiotherapy services at Westmoreland General, so people are not having to travel 3-4 hour round trips to get the service at Preston. And likewise, recognising that GP surgeries, and Brian mentioned this, we support a strategic small surgeries fund, I think Adrian did as well, and it's all about making sure that small surgeries in rural areas are able to survive, so you can go and see your doctor somewhere close to where you live, rather than having to go see somebody in a super surgery in the next biggest town.
Thank you, Tim. And over to Brian.
Well, I'd just like to carry on from what Tim was just saying, because London's running its own services. Just a second or two ago, I took this screenshot. I don't know if that's maybe because I'm, aha, there we are. Can you see that? There, just coming in now. So what it says is, to get from here to Carlisle right now, there's a bus scheduled at 18:07. I don't know if it's on time, right? From where I used to live in London, in Berridge Mews, you can't really see it. There's 2 different buses there. One of them is delayed. That'll be there in 7 minutes' time in Berridge Mews in West Hampstead, and the other one is also delayed by 7 minutes. That's a live time. To get people to use buses, you have to be able to know that they're coming. Okay, so a volunteer came to my house yesterday to do some leaflets. He waited for half an hour. And in the end, he decided to walk from Carlisle up to Stanwix because he didn't know when the bus was going to come. We need live radio GPS locations. Number 2, deaf people. Why can't we have flat fares? When a deaf person shows a deaf pass, we had this in a deaf meeting the other day, they're asked to say where they're going to. And the bus driver expects them to talk to them. They're just shown them a deaf pass. So why can't we have flat fares like they do in Scotland? Beep in, walk out. It's good for deaf people. In fact, it's good for everyone, foreign people as well when they're going to the fringe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. That's a new one. I've not heard that one before. That's really interesting. Okay, we're going to go to Carol now, who's going to ask us about zero carbon and just transition. Over to you, Carol.
Yeah, so my question is, how will you help rural communities contribute to decarbonisation and our critical net zero targets as part of a just transition?
Thank you, Carol. And we're going to start again with Brian.
Well, look, our manifesto is quite clear on this. We're going to cut net zero to net zero by 2045, and it's a costed program for doing that, especially using renewable energy. When we were in coalition, for good or for bad, but Ed Davey was our energy secretary, and we got lots of wind farms built, and those wind farms are now meaning that this summer, right now, there's probably no coal being burnt in the power stations. And that goes on sometimes in the summer now for more than a month or two. Tidal power as well. Ian Carmichael's been pushing very much for tidal power, and I think West Cumbria could do very well out of that as well. So these would be rural projects, solar panels. Animals can graze, and you can produce crops underneath solar panels very happily, whilst having the solar panels there. What's not to like? Young people would get jobs in technology looking after all of this, rather than going to Manchester or London and leaving the area. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Over to you, Tim.
Well, just add to that, there's a particular issue that Carol talks about rural communities. I think there's some things that a lot of the issues when it comes to tackling climate change are nationwide. I am going to say that during Ed Davey's time in energy and climate change, we saw, and it's never happened before or since, a quadrupling in just 2-3 years of the amount of renewable energy we produce in this country. We need to go on that kind of steep curve once again if we're going to tackle the climate emergency and move towards a situation where we're leaving fossil fuels in the ground. You can't burn them if you don't dig them up in the first place, which will also clarify my position on the West Coast coal mine, for example. That should not happen. But specifically about what rural communities can achieve, there's a lot of good projects out there, but that don't really take account of what it is to tackle these problems in rural communities. I mentioned earlier on zero carbon homes. Zero carbon homes were a thing. They were a planning constraint that councils could use for 14 months at the end of the coalition, and now they're not. And zero carbon is optional. Well, it shouldn't be optional. It should be built into the planning process locally and rural and in urban situations. My concern about one size fits all is that Eco4, Eco Plus, the government scheme, which does a lot of good when it comes to insulating and retrofitting homes, they're not very good at backing the kind of materials you need to use in rural communities where you've got a lot of single-skinned elderly buildings that can't be easily insulated. You need to back the particular materials and the kind of processes needed to make those energy efficient. I think those are the key things. Then also supporting farmers to be able to do small-scale hydro projects so we can subsidise farming, make sure they can keep going and have diversification to make sure their businesses keep going, but also make use of one of our most plentiful resources in what is, after all, the wettest county in England.
Thank you, Tim. Good summary there. And next, we're over to Izzy, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I would. It's an interesting one. This one, I would really like to see an open and honest conversation about net zero and exactly what it means for communities. Climate change has played a big part in my life. I used to volunteer with Friends of the Earth, made a video with some Emmerdale stars about wake up to climate change, and I made a film about lots of people stood still in Leeds with 60 months before we had catastrophic climate change. That was, I think, in 2007. And so it's taken a big part of my life. And as the years have gone on and I've seen that absolutely none of the predictions ever come true, I've really started to question. And, you know, we have carbon dioxide is less than 0.5% of the atmosphere. I'm afraid we're all being conned. It's a big hoax. And I think net zero is an absolute disaster for our communities. We need to have an open and honest conversation about why the scientists who are saying it's not happening are being silenced, and exactly what net zero means for everybody. It's a very, very scary situation that we find ourselves in, because nobody's asking the actual question. Carbon dioxide is a nutrient for plants. It's not a pollutant. So that would be my answer. I would really, really want communities to open their eyes and to ask some questions. And if I'm wrong, I'll hold my hand up and say a huge apologies. But yeah, leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Izzy. Over to Adrian now.
Yes, thanks. I think a lot of the all the information that's available shows a lot of the carbon that is being produced comes from housing. And there's a particular problem in rural areas with housing that is difficult to insulate. Tim's talked about sort of building construction methods that you sometimes find in rural areas being difficult to insulate. Also problems with heating systems, where if you're not connected to mains gas systems, people have to rely on oil systems and gas cans and so forth. And the two problems with this is environmentally it's not very good, and on the other hand it's also very expensive for people to heat homes that are difficult to insulate, those sorts of heating systems. So we need, I think, quite a sort of ambitious programme of insulating and looking at heat supplies in rural housing would be quite an important part of this. I remember going to New Biggin Public Hall when it first opened a few years ago, and they had a heat pump there that meant that they were carbon neutral. And I think that might be an example of the sort of way that we ought to go. Obviously, a lot of potential in the new farm subsidy system, the ELM system, to provide incentives for farmers to have, as Tim said, small scale schemes to green the environment. So yes, as I'm running out of time, I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adrian. Barry, over to you.
Thank you. Look, and I'm in favour of tidal power from Morecambe Bay linking to Barrow. It's been on the cards for how many years? I'd like to kickstart that, make it actually happen. And Barrow to Millom, that would just revolutionise my constituency, but only with proper EIAs to ensure that the movement of crustacea is ensured. You know, they can't have tidal energy. I've seen too many African dam projects to know that these, you know, many a slip twixt cup and lip. So it's important to make sure that things like that function, that the crustacea move, the plovers don't starve, and all the rest of it. These are important aspects to the ecology. Having said that, I'm actually not. I put a windmill up if you want on a solar panel. Why not if you can afford it? And but incentivize it? No. The market price of solar panels and windmills would dictate that. I will support the coking coal project in Whitehaven. It's not in my constituency, but I support fossil fuel development. Spent 25 years in the oil and gas industry. Talking to real climate scientists every day of my working life. Not met one who buys into the anthropogenic global warming myth. Certainly not the anthropogenic part of it. Look, we don't need, we're going to scrap the Climate Change Act. We're going to scrap this net zero nonsense and the green agenda. All of that swept away. So that's a lot of money saved for rural communities.
Thank you very much, Barry. Gina, over to you.
I'm glad I've got the last word on this one. I think the evidence before our eyes is that climate change is the biggest threat that's facing us. I'm just shocked that anyone think that the predictions haven't come true when we've had the hottest year on record, when we've got flooding, we've got drought, we've got heat stroke, so many problems. And it's only going to get worse because we know about the tipping point. So I don't know who's talking to which climate scientists, but the far majority of them saying this is the pressing problem. We've got 5 areas we need to address. Homes, we've talked about it, retrofit and buildings. Transport, we've started to talk about that. We didn't talk about actually making public transport really attractive to the visitors into the Lake District. You know, so we need to actually revolutionise the whole way that people come into Cumbria and for green tourism as well. Then there's land use. So we need to make sure that our farmers, we work with our farmers so that they become net carbon sinks rather than carbon emitters. But overall, the first thing we need to do at scale is decarbonise the energy system. And we've heard about various problems, but what is going on now is that each local area, however it's defined, geographical area, are producing their own local area energy plan of the decarbonisation of their own energy. And you get experts in to look at where is the energy used and how you actually approach this strategically. Manchester have done it, places in London, we've done it in Lancaster, we're actually about to publish ours this summer. So you then start to look, it's going to have to be a combination of various renewables. But I would just say that this idea of a bridge from Morecambe to Barrow as somehow the solution to this, the time that would take, if it were environmentally feasible, if it was in any way affordable, just wouldn't work. So I think let's not go, just because somebody might have suggested it on the back of a fag packet years ago, it's not a serious option. We need to look at those serious options that are already working and invest in battery storage. One final word, if I may, because this is my hot topic.
Very, very quickly, Gina.
Skills agenda. So many jobs are available to in this sector, so we will have plenty of employment, and we need to provide the skills, especially for the retrofit, but across the board. And that, if we encourage people to stay locally because they've got local, satisfying, meaningful work, that helps revive our communities.
Thank you, Gina. Okay, thank you very much for that, everybody. I'm glad some of you referred to transport in the zero carbon piece, because rural communities can only survive with a good deal of transport, because we have to actually move around the community in order to get to services, unless life changes a lot. So really good to hear you refer to that. Our last question is a catch-all, which hopefully will give you the opportunity to say anything you haven't said already. So Danny, can I come to you, please?
Hi, thanks, Lorraine. My question is, how will you ensure our smaller communities with a population of 2,000 or less can be sustainable, vibrant, healthy and happy places to live and work in the next 5 years?
Okay, thank you, Danny. Gina, over to you first.
Oh, I've got so much I'd like to say in this last minute and a half, but I think we have to go back to the original document. We need to have that belief that rural communities are important, make sure that Parliament is listening and everybody in government, that you've got good MPs representing you. I think we have to acknowledge that there is a general tendency for inequalities to have been increasing. We've seen it across the board. And that is what we need to address, because small communities are made up of local people who work in the area, who live there, go to school there. And we've just got to reverse that that tendency for the lifeblood, the money, to be sucked out of local communities to go down to London or whatever. So keeping things sustainable, but also really addressing the inequalities, keeps communities really healthy places to live and work, because they're diverse.
Thank you very much, Gina. Over to you, Barry.
Sorry, I'm unmuted. Good. Look, it's lifting 7 million out of tax would be a good start. A lot of the lower paid actually do live in rural communities. Be great if they were higher paid, but alongside the entrepreneurs and the established businesses, there are young people. There are people who are constrained for all sorts of reasons. They can't move, or they don't want to. They want to take local jobs. They should be able to live, hopefully survive, and thrive. So I mean, lifting, raising the threshold of income tax to 20k is a damn good idea, I think, and also assisting that process of prosperity is the simultaneous decision to sort of raise the threshold for VAT in small to medium size enterprises to 150k. That should do a lot to leave more freedom of maneuver for businesses to employ people, younger people. Look, it's about having communities hold together, and the stuff I was talking about earlier about the ability to retain older people inside the community, care in the community. You're talking about vibrancy and happy communities. It's about keeping all the generations together. So any policy which contributes to that is probably will get my vote, and it's certainly Reform Party policy.
Thank you, Barry. Over to Adrian now, please.
Yeah, very important. We can't try to keep these, some people like to call small towns, and other people like to call them big villages when you've got about 2,000 people in them, as vibrant as possible. And that doesn't only mean business activity, that means all sort of voluntary activity and community activity that goes on in these places as well. 3 things I think you need to do. You need to keep the population, and that goes in part back to housing, making sure that we have homes that are lived in by people as their main homes all year round, and not too many second homes or holiday homes in these places. And maintaining employment. There needs to be enough employment for people, preferably high value added, secure employment for people in those areas so that they want to stay there. You want to keep businesses there and develop businesses there. We need to encourage self-employment, new business formation. We need better broadband connections. so as to encourage business to these sort of towns. We've talked about that as well. Abolishing business rates and replacing them with a commercial landowner levy, I think is well, it is. I know it's a Liberal Democrat policy, and I think that would be beneficial as well. And I think thirdly, bring people in. You know, these towns should attract, villages should attract people in to sample the services that they've got and the activities that they've got. And we come back there again to public transport. It's not just a way of getting people out of villages into the bigger towns. It's a way of bringing people into the villages so that they can support the vibrancy of the services and activities those villages have got. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Over to you, Izzy, please.
Yeah, I'm sure we're all on the same boat, because everybody just wants the best for rural communities. And so there's a lot of things that have been mentioned before. Housing, obviously, a key factor of the Heritage Party is to reduce the red tape, the micromanaging that goes on of farms and businesses and everything that it can be incredibly stifling, and we need to loosen that to enable these to flourish. You know, broadband obviously would help. I would love to see a restart of markets. The traditional market was a wonderful thing. A lot of them seem to have died out. I'd love to provide incentives for market traders to get back and start these communities again. I'd also, I don't know how to do it, but I'd also love to see the insurance / health and safety just restricted a bit to enable village galas and summer fetes and everything to go ahead so much more easily. I know that they can find it very difficult with the amount of red tape that they've got to deal with. And we'd see a massive boost to farming as well. I would like to see wool worth something again. I think that would transform Cumbria, and that would then just filter down through communities. But yeah, it's just all about life, and I think there is huge possibilities at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Izzy. Over to you, Tim.
I think a major part of what you've got to do if you're going to be a local MP in a rural community and genuinely add value is just to make your own luck. So there's no doubt whatsoever that national policy will make a big difference if we do things differently. You know, look, think of a community of 2,000 people, 1,000 houses. The problem is that so many of our communities, maybe 1,000 houses, but 500 of them are not lived in. And so that's the impact on the school and on all the other services that then get a reduced demand and are less likely to survive as a consequence. The number of schools in the new Western Lonsdale constituency with fewer than 30 pupils is terrifying. And once that school goes, you lose the community as well. So there needs to be a change in policy nationally so we can make sure we protect the housing stock. That's how you keep communities vibrant and build homes that are genuinely affordable, not just, you know, affordable in name only. But then, like I say, it's about making your own luck. And so the things that we've done, you know, if we'd not fought hard, Shap would not have a post office now. If we'd not fought hard, Haverthwaite would not still have a GP surgery. If we'd not fought hard, we wouldn't have, you know, re-established the bus to Sedbergh. We wouldn't have been able to re-establish the bus from the Cartmel Peninsula. You've sometimes just got to roll your sleeves up and make a difference on the ground. And when things are going against you, we've got to be communities that are not on the defensive, but on the offensive, and decide, no, these communities matter. Communities don't exist by accident. They exist because people are bloody minded enough to fight for them. And my job as a member of parliament, both in our area and nationally, if I am one again, is to make sure that we make our own luck by just inch by inch defending our territory and recognising rural communities are wonderful places, but they're under threat. If rural England was a separate region, it would be the poorest of all the regions of England. And that's not what most people in London and in Westminster think, but it's true. And that's why we need to fight our corner when it comes to local government funding as well. Final word, just so you're aware, you know, most of the funding we get in our local councils in our area based on the number of people who live here, taking no knowledge or no account whatsoever are the 20 million people who visit our communities every single year. Delighted to have them. It's about time we got something for that to invest in our services that they are dependent upon as well as us.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, over to you, Brian.
Totally agree with you, Tim. I had a meeting with the chair of the primary care trust that looks after Cumberland Hospital, and he said it is a real problem, the fact they do not get funding on the number of people who are in the area rather than the people who live there. Homes for life, I'd like to see all new buildings to conform to level 2 of Part M of the building regs. That means you can stay in your house your whole life and easily adapt it if you can't move around easily, rather than having to move into a bungalow. Of course, there aren't many bungalows around. Living in villages, buses. We need to have the buses. You cannot rely on being able to drive the whole of your life. Many people can't drive, and some people lose their eyesight. Gigabit internet is very important so that you can work, play, and keep in touch with your family in a village. And also safety. So Scotby is a small village near me. They have a dual carriageway right outside the A69 for just 200 yards, turns into a dual carriageway, 2 lanes each way, 70 miles an hour. And guess where the bus stop is for the kids coming back from Trinity School? The other side of a dual carriageway that's a 70-mile-an-hour dual carriageway without any pedestrian crossing available. And finally, community hubs like at Hallbank Gate, for example, pubs and cafes where people can meet. Hallbank Gate's just about to lose its pub. The Belted Will looks like it's going to be turned into apartments. Very worrying. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, we don't have any additional questions in the chat, so I hope you've all heard what you wanted to hear because you provided the questions. Thank you very much to all of the candidates. That was really, really interesting. We really, as ACT, we look forward to working with whoever gets in, because whoever it is, we will work with you to make the very best for rural communities. All of you, go out and tell everybody you know to vote, because that's the one way we get to express our opinion about the election. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for speaking. And we look forward to working with you in the future.